You're locked in to the hottest station on the planet.
Resistance is futile. The revolution has begun.
You're listening to Rebelpreneur Radio, helping you break the rules and build the business you need for the life you want. And now, broadcasting his pirate signal
from somewhere beyond the status quo,
here's your host, best-selling author, marketing and media strategist, Ralph Brogden.
Hello and welcome to Rebelpreneur Radio. It's the show that helps you build the business you need so you can live the life you want. I'm Ralph Brogden. Let me ask you a question. How are your 2020 New Year's resolutions coming along? If you're anything like me, this year has been completely not what I planned, not what I expected. And so now the question becomes not, how do we achieve our New Year's resolutions? The question is, how do we pivot and become resilient in the face of things that we would have never even imagined happening at the beginning of the year when we made all of our visionary goals and strategic objectives? Did we take into consideration things that we have no control over that now all of us are struggling to try and figure out how to deal with? Today's guest is an expert at mental models and guiding principles for leading through uncertainty. So I can't think of a better time for him to be a part of our show. I'm pleased to welcome Mark Green. He is a speaker, an author, a strategic advisor, and business and leadership growth coach to CEOs and executive teams worldwide. He works with mid-market CEOs who are driven to scale up but can't get there fast enough. Mark's books include Activators, a CEO's guide to clearer thinking and getting things done, and Creating a Culture of Accountability. These books tackle costly, real-world issues with practical, easy-to-implement, research-based tools and techniques. Mr. Mark Green, you are the man of the hour. Welcome to Rebelpreneur Radio.
Oh, hi, Ralph. Great to be with you today. Thank you.
I can't think of a more opportune time to bring in someone who has guiding principles for leading through uncertainty. No one has any idea what's going on, no idea when or how long it's going to last, and the impact is going to create ripple effects everywhere. Businesses have had to change. And as a result, the way we think about our business, the way we think about our very lives is shifting. So I want to get into this idea of how do we need to shift our thinking? What are those mental models that we need to begin to adapt? But before we do that, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get started in this area of strategic advising?
So I started my practice almost 20 years ago as a leadership development training firm and began working with clients much like your listeners, startup entrepreneurs, early scale-ups, and even solopreneurs and professionals like attorneys and accountants who were trying to become better in their role as leaders and have more success in their business. And over the years, my practice evolved and took the form that it's currently in about 10 years ago now. And I work exclusively with CEOs and teams as a team running high-growth mid-market firms. And I've come to discover that the team approach, for my purposes, is a much more effective approach in terms of getting all the right people in the right room and having them learn at the same pace and grow at the same pace. And here's the secret behind everything I do. I've never witnessed a business with a sustainable growth rate that exceeds the personal growth rate of the people running it. And that's fundamentally what I help my clients do.
That's very powerful. And so when we talk about mid-market, we're talking about CEOs with revenue of $50 to $400 million. So we're talking about ways that you can leverage and massively scale up what you're doing. But you're saying that the company, the business, the brand, whatever it is, it's not going to grow and accelerate and scale up any faster than the people who are responsible for running it.
Without a doubt. And that's a principle that applies whether you're a teeny tiny startup or, frankly, a dinosaur Fortune 100 firm. The same principle applies. And I think it's critical for your listeners to understand that even though I work with the clients who I work with, every single thing I'm going to share today will apply to them in their own world, in their own way. The difference is how these things are implemented and the scale at which they're implemented, but the concepts and the fundamental principles behind them are all exactly the same.
That's what I love about it. And you are a student of human behavior, as I am. And what we try to do is look for those universal principles that apply to humans, regardless of where the humans are, regardless of what the humans are doing, that there are certain universal evergreen principles of human behavior that affect everything we think, say, do, believe. And then I think it's such a powerful thing to tap into that and learn how to get leverage through just a handful of principles that can be universally applied. So let's talk about that first. What is the biggest challenge? You're working with and coaching CEOs and teams of these enormously successful companies doing millions of dollars in revenue. And there is still this drive that they want to scale up and they want to get even bigger. Is there ever a limit, do you think, where a CEO says, I think we're about as big as we need to be and I'm content?
There's not, unless it's a part of an exit plan, and that happens for sure. The battle that we fight in creating scale is a battle of complexity. And I want your listeners to understand this very, very clearly. We think as I scale my business, it scales in a linear fashion. We tend to think about business linearly, meaning I only add one customer at a time, or we'll get to a point, we'll open a second office, okay, or we'll hire one employee at a time, or even if you're hiring very, very rapidly, fundamentally, you're still hiring one person at a time, and there's a linear scale to the business. What you don't realize is that as the business scales in a linear fashion, the complexity of your business is scaling exponentially in terms of thinking about the number of interactions that now must occur between people that are in the business and each other, the number of interactions that must occur with your customers, your suppliers, et cetera. And it's the complexity that is the thing that ends up holding businesses back and preventing the leaders from being able to get to that place that they want to go.
Interesting. And so what you have spoken and just described, there's the complexity of the inward stressors on that business. What we are experiencing at every level today are external stressors, environmental threats, things outside of the business, not to mention the complexity of the business itself as it's trying to grow and scale, but then trying to grapple with issues outside of the control of the business. We're having to adapt new ways of communicating, new ways of operating, and we are all in uncharted territory right now. What are some of these guiding principles that you share with others that you can share with our listeners to help lead people, organizations, leaders of all shapes and sizes through these times where no one really knows how it's going to end up?
Let me start with a definition of the problem. And externally, there is absolutely a source of complexity that adds to the picture without a doubt. We're all living through it right now. But have you ever had the experience of what you thought was the problem wasn't really the problem?
Yeah.
Like for those of anybody who's had a child, right? You know that sometimes you think the baby's crying for a certain reason, and of course, more times than not, that's actually not the reason, and there's something else that's going on. Or if you've ever done your own car repair, you know the frustration of chasing the wrong problem, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where we are today in this environment. I hear it a lot. Leaders all around are talking about the pandemic. They're talking about civil unrest right now, and all kinds of other things they're talking about as if that was the problem. That's not the problem. I think that those things are evidence of the problem. The problem facing business leaders today is the velocity of change. Okay? Because that's the reason that these events that they're talking about are a problem for them. It's not the event itself, it's the velocity of change surrounding the event that the leader has to then respond to, or that is affecting the business somehow. And so I want to frame it that way for your listeners, so that as I give you these 3 guiding principles that I'm going to lead with today, you understand that they're designed to solve the real problem, not the symptom of the problem.
Very good. Very good.
So I'm going to share 3 guiding principles with you. And these are guiding principles that I've been using very actively with my clients over the past several months as we've been living through this challenging part of 2020. And we start with a guiding principle of structure. And this is really critical as a foundation. And what I mean by structure is this idea that there are structural elements and disciplines around how you are operating your business, how you're communicating with your team. We call them communication rhythms. There's daily huddles, weekly meetings, monthly meetings, and so on and so forth. That's a structural element. How you set priorities for the business, how you create accountability for those priorities, how you execute on those priorities. Those are all structural elements of your business. The structure is absolutely critical in a high velocity change environment because it gives you something to fall back on. I've heard from more than one client of mine, and remember, these are big organizations with some of them upwards of 1,000 employees. They said, Mark, the structures that we have in place, particularly how we communicate as an organization, helped us move every single employee to a virtual, home office type environment. And literally within the span of 2 days, we were operating as if we were all still together. That's powerful. And so the issue is that entrepreneurs often feel like they have to shoot from the hip, and I have to be agile, which, by the way, remember that word, you're going to hear in a second. And I have to stay flexible and be able to respond to opportunities and all of that. And they say, but I don't want structure. I don't need more meetings. I don't need these things. And the paradox is that that's exactly what ends up holding them back. Now, the second guiding principle I'd like to share with you is diametrically opposed to structure. And you guessed it, it is agility, in fact. And it is the ability to adapt and move quickly and turn on a dime and make things happen and make rapid decisions. And interestingly, it's the structural foundation that enables organizations and leaders to be agile. Because again, you've got the basics taken care of so that you have the bandwidth to respond with agility to the velocity of change and things that are happening in the external environment.
So far you've shared structure and agility, and
that's exactly right.
So these are complementary one to another. The structure, what you're saying, if I think I understand, you're saying that the structure, by taking care of the basics, making sure that we have regular communication, the disciplines, the rhythms, a set way of doing things, it handles the everyday stuff so that it actually frees our mind to be able to be agile, adaptive, creative, to have more mental acuity, to have greater bandwidth, so that we can make these decisions on the fly that we need to make, and we're not burdened through a lack of structure. But these are working together.
Absolutely. And to create another analogy to make it really, really clear, if you're a CEO or an entrepreneur, and today you are spending most of your time down in the engine room of your ship, okay, shoveling the coal and pumping the pumps and manning the thing and making sure all the equipment's working in the engine room, okay, you do not have the ability to, at the same time, be up on the bridge looking out with binoculars saying, whoa, we better turn to the left really fast or we're going to hit something here.
Yeah.
And it's the structure that you have to put in place to get yourself out of the engine room and give the people who are working for you a predictable framework within which to operate.
Now, for
That then
people,
allows you to do those other things.
yes. Now, for people who are in this solopreneur environment or a very small business environment where they don't have a team of people working for them or working with them, the structure is going to come down to their daily disciplines, taking care of their health, sleep, eat correctly, doing their exercise routines, taking care of themselves and their relationships and their families, getting those things in order and structured so that you can then be free mentally and physically and have the energy that you need to be able to be creative and do the things that you need to do as a solopreneur, as a solo practitioner, as a professional service provider. This is how you create and give yourself the freedom to be able to be effective in the midst of these things. It's not the time to let go of those structures. It's the time to keep those structures in place and really create for yourself the space needed to be able to deal with these things.
No doubt. And I'd like to add two things to that list if I can.
Sure.
The first thing is you have to be able to structure your day, structure your business day. So this is a big yes and. Structure your business day and stick to the structure of your day, which gives you time to be agile. And secondly, I find that a lot of solopreneurs don't do a great job with boundaries. And the boundaries I'm thinking about are boundaries with clients or boundaries with other people who are around us that put a limit on what we're willing to do or not do in the context of a particular relationship. And that's another element of structure that we don't often think about, but that can absolutely drain you of time and energy if you're not careful.
Yes, yes. Well, I've experienced this myself in that, like a lot of people, when you're in a lockdown mode and you're not supposed to leave your house, if you don't stick to your routines, you tend to eat too much. You tend to drink too much. You tend to put on weight. And so it's easy to see how without some kind of structure to your day, to your routines, and in a larger company or a larger business, structuring your teams, structuring your employees, structuring your workflow, structuring your client communication. If you don't have these structures in place, it's real easy just to kind of start drifting, and then you hit the iceberg, so to speak.
No doubt about it. Would you like to move on to the third guiding principle I have
Absolutely.
for you?
So we've talked about structure and agility. What's the third?
It's always important, but now more than ever, the third guiding principle is humanity. And it's making the time for what's most important right now. Now, as leaders and as entrepreneurs, we often think, well, I have to be very careful and I got to spend my time doing these things in the business and making sure the people who are working for me are getting things done and like that. And we tend to not focus as much on the people and on the relationships. And I call this concept leadership overhead. The idea that as a leader, we have to plan for some time that's just not efficient time, but it's critical time in building and maintaining relationships with the right people. Often our employees, sometimes our external partners, oftentimes also clients as well. Well, now more than ever, there's a much higher load, a higher demand of leadership overhead, and it's in the form of humanity. And if you're working with a team that's virtual right now, for example, or you're working with customers who you can't physically see right now, you have to take the time to build human-to-human connections beyond what you would normally do in an in-person interaction, because we take those things for granted, and they're sort of just baked in to how we relate as human beings when we're actually face-to-face. So are you taking the time and are you focusing on humanity? I'll give you an example.
Sure.
I have a client, a 1,000-person organization, and the head of the entire selling organization in that firm, which is more than half the company, said, Mark, you know what the best question is to develop humanity, to honor the guiding principle of humanity when I'm talking to somebody in my organization? The question is, tell me what you're planning to have for dinner tonight.
Hmm.
And here's the reason why. We're all in quarantine right now. Everybody's kind of locked down a little bit. We don't have the normal freedoms that we would normally have. But one thing that we can choose for ourselves, even if it's just to select from what's currently in the refrigerator and the pantry, is what we're going to make for dinner. And he said when he asks this question, people light up. They go on about, oh, we're going to make this beef dish and this thing, and it's my grandmother's recipe, and you're not going to believe it. And it's this amazing thing. But what he's doing by asking this basic question is opening up the humanity in the relationship and building that. And it is just so important right now for people who feel isolated and maybe afraid and uncertain, and they have financial pressure. Many of us have children at home with us who are homeschooling and that we're unfamiliar with that environment, and on and on and on. And so we've got to make sure as leaders, we're allowing the leadership overhead to build humanity.
I love that. And that is the power of shared experiences. And it may sound like a small thing, but wow, what a great impact when you can connect with people on a human level beyond whatever business you're there to conduct, beyond the sales call, beyond just the status update of the project. To be able to connect with people, I think that's a tremendously valuable insight. So you've shared three: structure, agility, and then humanity. I think those things are very, very powerful. And I'm going to begin to implement that. I'm going to put that into practice. For our listeners who are interested in finding out more about what you do, what resources do you have available to them that they could take advantage of?
So there's two ways to connect with me. The first is directly through my website at mark-green.com. And I have all kinds of content up there. You can link through to each of my two books. I also have all of the tools and assessments from my first book, Activator, available free on the website for download. And a lot of people use those. So that's a great way to connect with me and check out the books and look at some of the tools. The other way is on LinkedIn. You can find me at Coach Mark Green. I put out an awful lot of content on LinkedIn, including a every other week newsletter, and would love the opportunity to continue to share with your listeners.
This has been very, very timely, and some of the most practical. I mean, you promised real-world issues with practical, easy-to-implement, research-based tools and techniques. And I can't think of a more practical way to impact people than taking what we've discussed: structure, agility, and humanity. Figure out what that looks like in your business, in your organization. Regardless of size, these are universal principles, and we all can benefit from adding a little bit more humanity to the process, or adding a lot more humanity to our business. Excellent. Mr. Green, any final thoughts or words of wisdom that you'd like to leave our listeners with?
You bet. There is one thing, and it's a question I am asked all the time from entrepreneurs and smaller business CEOs who have aspirations to scale. They say, Mark, what's the difference? What makes the difference between somebody like me and the kind of CEO that you work with today, up in the mid-market? And I always give them the same answer because I really believe it to be true, Ralph. And the answer is time. It's time. That's the only difference between you and them. If you do the work, if you continue to learn from people in programs like Ralph, and you continue to surround yourself with the right people, the only difference is time.
Excellent. Well said, well put. Mark Green is a speaker, an author, a strategic advisor, and a business and leadership growth coach to CEOs and executive teams worldwide. He is the author of Activators and Creating a Culture of Accountability. He tackles costly real-world issues with practical, easy-to-implement research-based tools and techniques. You can find out more at mark-green.com. We'll have that link on the Rebelpreneur website as well. Mark, thank you so much for your time on Rebelpreneur Radio today. I really appreciate it.
Ralph, thank you. It's wonderful to be with you and your listeners today.
You've been listening to Rebelpreneur Radio with Ralph Brogden. Download the show notes and much more at rebelpreneur.com.